The dark, disturbing, and borderline illegal video game Iceberg? Let's go. Amnesia is a survival horror franchise with 4 main entries, each following a different protagonist as they descend deeper and deeper into complex and creepy locations after having lost their memories. The first game has sanity as a unique and vital gameplay element, with light being your best friend. The games were developed and published by Frictional Games, who released Amnesia on September 8, 2010. The narrative is set in 1839 and follows a man named Daniel, who wakes up in a creepy castle with no memories. 3 loosely connected sequels were made over the course of 13 years, starting with Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs, released on September 10, 2013. Now set in 1899 with a new protagonist who has also lost their memories and must find his children. This was followed by Amnesia Rebirth, released on October 20th, 2020, which featured another protagonist with no memories searching for the Algerian desert for their husband in 1937. The most recent Amnesia, The Bunker, set in 1916 and following yet another new protagonist navigating a bunker during World War I. Resident Evil, arguably the most popular franchise in the entire horror genre, was first released in 1996 by Capcom. The series follows a long-spanning plotline about evil corporations making viruses that turn people into zombies, mutants, and all kinds of abominations, all with the unique and compelling cast of characters that risk their lives to stop these outbreaks. I'm not going to list every entry to this franchise because, my god, there is a lot, but this series has been going strong since 1996, with 8 mainline entries, the most recent of which being Resident Evil Village, released in 2021. There are tons of spin-off titles, and over the last few years, Capcom has been going through all the older games in order and remaking them, with the most recent remake being Resident Evil 4 in 2023. This franchise has also managed to infiltrate the film industry, with I believe 2 different film series, one directly connected to the games, and one set in its own universe. Before we continue the video, I do have to shout out my beloved Patreons. We got Brian Hahn, Fat Lucky Potato, Icy Storm, Giovanni Diaz, Mayall, GDI Smackdown, Borg, Ty Mulan, Henry Heiberg, Money Shot, Cyrus, One Up Gamer, and Zach White. If you'd like to be a Patreon supporter, check out that link down there below in the description. Patreons get videos early and get to help Scooby and the gang solve mysteries. So if you'd like to be one, link is down there below in the description. The Dead Space games are a third-person survival horror game set in the 26th century, mainly following protagonist Isaac Clarke as he fights against the Necromorphs, horrific undead abominations. The 3 mainline entries each center around specific locations, all host to violent Necromorph attacks. Gameplay consists of over-the-shoulder shooting where dismemberment is a key mechanic in combat. The first game released in October of 2008 and was published by Electronic Arts. Dead Space 2 and 3 released in 2011 and 2013 respectively. 2 smaller entries, Dead Space Extraction and Dead Space Ignition, were released as prequels for Dead Space 1 and 2, and a remake of the original game released in January of 2023. There are also some comics and novels, all of which contribute to the grand plot of the series, and there is certainly some really interesting lore in this franchise. Dead Rising is one of the most iconic zombie games of all time. First released by Capcom in 2006, the first game follows protagonist Frank West as he investigates some strange occurrences in the fictional town of Willamette, Colorado. Frank soon becomes trapped in a shopping mall with many other survivors, and although the goal is to uncover the cause of the outbreak, once the player takes control, they can really do anything they want for the 3 in-game days that they're stuck in the mall, including ignoring every single side objective. The game has also been praised for the fact that pretty much everything can be used as a weapon. The game is a sandbox game at its best. 3 mainline sequels released in 2010, 2013, and 2016, each introducing a new story, new protagonist, and a variety of new gameplay elements. There are also a number of standalone titles released in this franchise that serve to connect the events of the first 2 games. The BioShock trilogy, which was developed by 2K Games, is a really interesting franchise about 2 different cities. each built and strengthened by philosophical and political ideas. The first Bioshock, released in 2007, follows a man named Jack in 1960, who, after a plane crash, ends up in the retro-futuristic underwater city of Rapture, right after a civil war that left the city as a lawless hellscape. The game was pretty linear, as the player had to progress through the city, take in the sights, upgrade their weapons, and kill mindless citizens of Rapture rendered insane by excessive use of plasmids, a new type of miracle drug exclusive to Rapture that provides users with supernatural abilities. A sequel, Bioshock 2, released in 2010, and brought players back to Rapture, now in 1968, as they navigate the city as the Big Daddy. The final installment so far is Bioshock Infinite, which was released in 2013 and set in the flying city of Columbia, as Booker DeWitt tracks down a woman named Elizabeth in the city. These games, especially the entries in Rapture, have some pretty creepy lore, and wandering through the abandoned, crumbling buildings of Rapture as the city falls apart is something you never really forget. But I think Bioshock's biggest claim to fame has to deal with Bioshock Infinite, and the new tech that was brought upon the world, all thanks to Elizabeth. If you don't know what I mean, just Google it. It's some Rule 34, man. Some pretty impressive things happen just because people want to see Elizabeth do things. The internet, man. Bendy and the Ink Machine is an indie game that was released chapter by chapter from February 2017 to October of 2018. The story is about Henry Stein, a former animator during the 1930s, being summoned to his old studio by his former business partner, Joey Drew, sometime during the 1960s. Both men worked on a popular series of cartoons featuring the animated character Bendy. Shortly after arriving at the studio, Henry soon finds that a strange new technology known as the Ink Machine is bringing the old cartoon characters to life as horrific, hostile abominations made of ink. I remember hearing a lot about this game back in 2017, but then the hype kind of faded, which is why I was surprised to learn that the game actually got a sequel in November of 2022, a heap of other standalone games in between, and a third mainline installment which is currently in production. Telltale's The Walking Dead is a story-focused, choose-your-own-adventure type of game set in the comic universe of The Walking Dead. The game was released episodically across 4 seasons from April of 2012 to March of 2019. The story follows Clementine, a young girl and survivor of the zombie apocalypse who we see gradually grow up over the course of 4 seasons. The main story is told through the perspective of the 3 protagonists, one of which is Clementine herself. Season 1, commonly regarded as the best season, has us playing as Lee Everett, as he basically adopts Clementine to help her find her parents during the initial outbreak. He teaches her how to survive while also trying to keep a number of other survivors alive and bonding with them. Season 2 has us playing as Clementine, as she becomes separated from the last of her friends and meets up with new survivors as they try to find safety a few years after the first season. Season 3, A New Frontier, undoubtedly the most controversial, follows a new protagonist, Javier Garcia, as he tries to keep his family alive and find safety with the help from Clementine, who is looking for a child named AJ. Season 4, the final season, follows Clementine as the protagonist once again, as she and AJ settle with a new group of survivors and try to secure their safety. These games, especially the first 2 seasons, have a real unique atmosphere, which I attribute to their awesome comic-based art style, which really adds to the post-apocalyptic feel. And no matter what happens, just remember, Kenny will remember that. Little Nightmares was a puzzle platformer horror game released by Bandai Namco in April of 2017. The player controls Six, a little girl who must evade horrific, nightmarish giant monsters in order to escape a massive metal vessel known as the Maw. This game does a really good job at making you just feel small and insignificant as colossal abominations try to grab you to seemingly turn you into a meal. The game saw some DLC released over the course of 2017 and 2018, and 2 sequels with a new protagonist. The first being Little Nightmares 2, which released early in 2021, and the second being Little Nightmares 3, which is still in production and set to release sometime during 2025. Fallout being one of my favorite franchises of all time makes it difficult to not talk about it for the majority of this video. But here's a quick summary. Fallout is set after the global thermonuclear war between the United States and China in 2077, in an alternate timeline in which American culture plateaus sometime during the 1950s, but technology keeps progressing. In the years after the war, a bunch of different protagonists go on their journeys throughout the waste to determine the outcome of major regional wars, or stop sinister plots by certain factions. The lore of this franchise is extremely extensive, and each entry aims to show us a glimpse of real American cities in the aftermath of nuclear war, including Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington DC, Las Vegas, Boston, and more. I'm still waiting on that Florida game, Bethesda, but anyway. Fallout 1, developed by Interplay Entertainment, released on October 10th of 1997 as an isometric turn-based RPG and came with a heavy emphasis on choice and roleplay. This would become a staple for majority of games up until Fallout 4 and 76, where it kind of took a backseat to combat and settlement building. The Fallout IP was acquired by Bethesda Softworks in the mid-2000s, which saw the release of Fallout 3 shortly after in 2008, turning the franchise into a first-person shooter RPG. Fallout New Vegas shortly released after in 2010, then Fallout 4 in 2015, and finally Fallout 76 in 2018. A TV show was also released earlier this year, well, last year, and now fans are eagerly awaiting both a second season and Fallout 5, hopefully sometime within the next 10 years. But in my opinion, what really makes Fallout creepy and what really makes you kind of get the little shivers is learning about the vaults. Majority of vaults were experiments from Vault-Tec, whether it's Vault 11 and their sinister election process where they have to sacrifice one person a year or they think everybody else in the vault will die. You end up learning that from a holotape there was only one survivor.
Are we really gonna do this? It's open, we could just leave.
I couldn't, not after that.
We don't deserve to leave. A shining example. That's what it called us. But we did what we were supposed to. Not by a long shot. Anybody would have done what we did.
You ask me? That's exactly the problem. Now let's get on with this.
I'll go first. Wait. People should know what happened. They could learn from it. If there's anyone out there at all, I hope they never have to find out. Ready, Harry? Yeah. No, wait!
Or whether it was Vault 108 with the infamous Gary.
Gary!
Or Vault 92, where they had a subtle white noise constantly being played that turned everyone absolutely crazy. No matter what vault you go through, there is some chilling backstory behind it, and some are definitely creepier than others. Left 4 Dead is one of Valve's iconic franchises, first released in November of 2008, with a sequel exactly 1 year later in 2009. The games are first-person shooters in which 4 survivors fight through a series of unique East Coast-themed levels to reach safety during a zombie outbreak. The first game was praised for its atmosphere, characters, co-op gameplay, and portrayal of typical Hollywood zombie action and tension. The sequel, Left 4 Dead 2, managed to take everything Left 4 Dead 1 did right and do it even better. The good thing is though, Valve still supports the first Left 4 Dead, which is partially in response to controversy that arose during the announcement of Left 4 Dead 2. A popular 2010 2D puzzle platformer, Limbo is well known for its dark, depressing, and creepy atmosphere. In terms of story, there really isn't too much to it, just a boy trying to find a sister, and that's the charm. The developers of this game, Playdead, released another game in 2016 titled Inside, which took heavy inspiration from Limbo, but we'll get to that one later.
Welcome to Quality Basics in Education and Learning.
A puzzle horror game developed and published by Mika McGonigal back in March of 2018, it is based on old educational video games from the 1990s, with a similar iconic retro style. Gameplay involves grabbing 7 textbooks, answering math questions, and avoiding the extremely violent math teacher, Baldy, who gets progressively more angry the more answers the player gets wrong. Other NPCs found in the map will also either aid the player or hinder their efforts to escape Baldi and collect the textbooks. Now, listen, I'm not an expert, and I barely passed the 3rd grade, but I don't think a teacher that beats students to death with a ruler for incorrectly answering questions should be allowed to teach. Hot take. This 2000s PC game is an interesting take on the iconic 1865 novel Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, or more commonly known as just Alice in Wonderland. This version of the story doesn't follow the traditional rabbit hole to Wonderland, and instead focuses on a mentally scarred and broken Alice who mentally retreats to Wonderland to escape her trauma. Naturally, with such a messed up mental state, the version of Wonderland depicted in this game is all twisted and messed up, creating a pretty cool horror experience. Stalker, developed by Ukrainian developer GSC Game World, is a survival horror game set in Chernobyl, in an alternate timeline where a second nuclear catastrophe occurred 20 years after the first one back in 1986. This version of Chernobyl features a heap of supernatural phenomena, including strange artifacts and mutants. The Stalker franchise has some interesting lore spread across 4 different entries, with the first game released in 2007 and the most recent entry releasing in late 2024. Welcome to the Game is a 2016 indie game developed by Reflex Studios, in which the player must browse the dark web to locate a red room, which basically live streams torture. The red room can be found by finding 8 keys that form a URL, and the player not only must complete their objectives within 30 days, but they also must be aware of the surroundings and avoid being kidnapped from their home. A sequel was released 2 years later in 2018, which followed a pretty similar premise. A Flash game developed by Dean Monahan and released on Newgrounds back in 2010, this game follows a scientist who develops a cure for cancer that starts attacking non-cancerous cells, causing a mass extinction event that the player must prevent by creating an antidote. The game features a unique mechanic, in that once getting one of these 7 endings, the game is specifically designed so you cannot replay it. So whatever ending you get, that's it. Now, of course, there are easy workarounds to start a new game, such as changing browsers or PC, but doing this would definitely detract from what the developer had in mind, and I think this is a pretty cool concept. A game developed by Annapurna and released in 2017 for pretty much every platform at the time, What Remains of Edith Finch follows protagonist Edith as she visits her old family manor and explores their tragic histories behind each individual in the family tree. The game, while having a creepy atmosphere, isn't a typical horror game, but some of the short stories you experience throughout the game are pretty messed up, and I believe every single one pretty much ends up with each character dying a very gruesome death. The Long Dark is a brutal survival game developed by Hinterland Studios and released into early access in September of 2014. It sends the players to a harsh Canadian wilderness during a snowstorm. So not only are you stuck in a snowstorm outside, but you're in Canada. Cringe. With the only objective being to survive as long as possible. The open world has 12 different regions to explore with some pretty cool places of interest, and a helpless atmosphere that leaves a lasting impression. And whenever I do play this game, I'll end up playing it for hours and hours, and it just feels like I'm collecting nothing but firewood and cans of food, but for some reason, the survival aspect really sucks you in. Definitely give this game a try if you like survival games. The Forest, arguably up there with the greats of the early 2010s survival genre, this game has the player surviving on an island after a plane crash while looking for their son, who happens to have been kidnapped by violent cannibals. The game had a pretty cool map, decent building system, and heaps of caves to explore, and gear to find, along with an interesting narrative that exposed some secrets of the island. A sequel, Sons of the Forest, released in early 2023 and actually managed to do what most good sequels should, and improved on the first story. But I gotta say, the best part about this game is watching your friend build something magnificent, and then you just accidentally destroying it. LSD Dream Emulator is a 1998 Japanese exploration game in which players just explore strange, surreal, and dreamlike worlds with no real goal. The surreal environments, lack of direction, and old school appearance of the game combine to make an experience that can be pretty creepy at times, and not to mention the strange Shadow Man that can occasionally appear and undo all of your progress. You gotta admit, old school Japanese games were something else. Inside, which I touched on earlier, was made by the same developers as Limbo and features a very similar style and gameplay. The story is again about a boy navigating through a strange and hostile environment, and the narrative is mainly told through the surroundings the player finds themselves in. The exact purpose of this boy's journey is unclear, and some people still make speculations to this day. The Theater is a game developed by Sad Satan, based off an old creepypasta from 2010, about a lost mid-90s retro horror game where the player gives a ticket to a guy who lets them go down a dark hallway, before it cuts to black and they end up back at the start. The game is designed so that the player just does this over and over until things get even weirder. The retro graphics complement the fact that most of the movie posters and dialogue heard in-game is incomprehensible, and makes for the feeling of a hellish dreamscape as you navigate the theater. Darkwood is a top-down survival horror game which was set in a Soviet Union territory where the player must spend the day crafting, scavenging, and building up their skills to prepare for nighttime, where they must fortify a hideout and defend against monsters until morning. The game was developed by Acid Wizard Studios and released in early access in January of 2014, with a full release for PC coming 3 years later in August of 2017, and a console release in May of 2019. The game received pretty good reviews and is still available to play on pretty much every platform. Vapor is a 2015 horror game developed by these people. I think if I read this, I would probably summon like an ancient demon, so I'm not going to do that. But anyway, Vapor is about a warlock who ends up in purgatory after being tortured and executed, and must now fight their way through this strange realm to make it back to Earth and get revenge on those who tormented him. The game, while it has its pretty cool concept and atmosphere, is notoriously plagued by bugs, and is currently rated 37% on Steam reviews, which is pretty bad. Worlds.com was a 3D online communication platform released by Worlds Incorporated back in 1995. This is obviously not a horror game, but it might as well be one. From what I could tell, it's not even really a game at all, but it is playable, and no matter what year you play this in, it feels like you're stepping back in time to the mid-90s, which is pretty cool until the graphics start to creep you out a little bit. Although, the graphics aren't as creepy as the fact that this game was notorious for hosting an alleged cult, the Cult of Saturn, which was associated with some pretty deranged members who weren't afraid of doxing people and even going to further extremes that affected their victims in real life. And to top it off, there's a strange man running around known as Nexialis with a terrifying appearance who would stalk random people and teleport them to creepy locations. A vehicular combat game from 1997, Carmageddon, developed by Stainless Games, originally started out as a Mad Max video game, but due to being unable to acquire a license for it, the developers instead opted to make it under the Death Race 2000 IP. The game is a typical racing game with a time limit, but it was unique for the time as there was alternate ways for beating the races, including demolishing all the other vehicles in the level, or killing every pedestrian in the level, which, considering this was 1997, caused a bit of controversy and made this game stand out as rather dark for the time period. Tomato Way, it's a FPS slasher where you play as a literal tomato and kill monsters for money. I don't know how anybody would ever think. I don't know. Anyway, it released in December of 2016 and is overall a pretty trippy experience with some creepy visuals, and it's dirt cheap too. So if you ever want to play as a tomato in an FPS game, I guess this is for you. Uninvited is a 1986 point-and-click adventure game in which the protagonist, who I believe isn't actually given a name, wakes up from a car crash and goes to a nearby mansion to look for their missing sibling. They soon find the mansion is haunted and occupied by zombies, hellhounds, and other supernatural creatures. The game focuses on solving puzzles to gradually unlock more of the mansion to find the player's sibling. For those of you who enjoy retro gaming experiences, I believe a more modern version of this game can actually be found on Steam. Free Ice Cream was a 2009 Flash game found on Newgrounds, about two little girls being kidnapped and having to escape the house of a crazy chef who is going to murder them. I don't think I need to explain why this one is a tad bit disturbing. It's a scenario that has sadly probably played out in real life before. Published by Superflat Games in 2012 as a Flash game, Lone Survivor is a 2D post-apocalyptic game where the player must venture out and find food and other supplies while avoiding hostile mutants. The player is provided with an apartment as their home base, and they must return to it pretty frequently to sleep and progress. The game has a story with a few different endings, and as always, nothing says creepy like a good post-apocalyptic horror game. I can't lie, probably not as creepy as Free Ice Cream. I think that one might take the cake so far. This game is such a unique entry to me, as it's not necessarily a game, but an insanely accurate recreation of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Players get a score based on how accurately they create the real-life assassination. And for a short period after the release, the developers offered a real cash reward for players who could recreate the assassination. I don't think this will surprise anyone, but this game and the cash reward caused a massive controversy back in the day. The developers eventually had to release an apology statement, basically telling everyone that there was no malicious intent or efforts to glorify the event. Despite the harsh criticisms of the game, a small section of the fanbase actually asked the developers for recreations of other historical deaths, with the 1997 death of Princess Diana being a particularly popular request. Purgatory is a 2017 JRPG developed by Nama. It follows a girl named Enri, who is peer pressured by another girl named Emma into entering the Purgatory building, which leads her to a bloody place filled with butchered corpses, where she must escape the threat known as the Butcher. A remake of the game was released in 2024, and a sequel 3 years earlier in 2021. Two more entries to the franchise are seemingly in development, with Purgatory 3 set to release in early 2025. All right, this entry is definitely it's something, all right. Ethnic Cleansing is a 2002 first-person shooter that was intentionally designed to be as racist and offensive as possible, and that becomes obvious real quick. The player can control a notorious domestic terrorist, a member of the Ku Klux Klan, or a neo-Nazi, and the main goal is just to kill minorities, who are all portrayed with degrading stereotypes. Now, none of you are going to see this coming, but surprise, surprise, this game was incredibly controversial. And I would hope I don't need to explain why. This game was produced by the National Alliance, an American white supremacist group, who seem to have a portfolio of one or two similar games about killing minorities. And this one has to take the cake for probably the weirdest game I've ever seen. A simulation game similar to JFK Reloaded, but this time we're focused on 9/11. The game has you playing as an office worker who tries to escape the World Trade Center shortly after the first attack. The game seems really short and ends with the player forced to decide whether to stay in the tower and die of smoke inhalation or jump out of a window to their death. With the game releasing in 2015, only 14 years after the September 11th attacks, it rightfully upset a lot of people who saw the game as disrespectful to the lives lost that day. America's Army is a series of first person shooter games that released in 2002 and were actually made by the US Army. The intention was to give people an idea of what serving in the military would actually be like. America's Army was designed to present a realistic combat experience, and it even featured an optional medical based training experience, with some add on DLCs about buying a Camaro, marrying a stripper, and her getting pregnant while you're overseas. Okay, the last DLC part I may have made up. But I believe as of 2024, this series has 4 entries, with a 5th one that was cancelled sometime around 2018. And instead of putting all the effort into these video games, they should have just gave Michael Bay more money for more Transformer movies, because those things were like military porn. Happy Mouse is a 2013 game based off of the Suicide Mouse creepypasta, which was a black and white cartoon featuring a looped animation of the Disney character Mickey Mouse walking along with several buildings accompanied by eerie piano music. And it would get darker and darker as the video went on. The game is pretty much a side-scroller in which the world and characters change around you as your sanity depletes, becoming nightmarish, distorted versions of themselves, very similar to the actual creepypasta. Stasis is a 2015 isometric horror game developed by The Brotherhood, in which protagonist John Marichak awakens from cryostasis on a spacebound ship for Titan, finds the whole crew dead and his wife and daughter missing. As John progresses through the game, he actually learns the spaceship was intended as a research facility where scientists experimented on the passengers and tortured them in horrific ways to try and create super soldiers. The resulting mutations created a species of violent beings that overran the ship and killed everyone. This game received pretty good reviews and definitely has one hell of a creepy atmosphere. It's only available on PC, so if you're interested, you can find it on Steam. Released in 2018 by Studio 98 Demake, September 1999 is a very short, I'm talking like 5-minute horror experience in which you navigate a house through the eyes of an old 90s analog recorder. The game pulls off the visual style really well, and if you're a fan of this more retro style horror, definitely take a look at this. It's worth playing. Though only if you happen to have the free time, 5 minutes to spare, plus the game's free. Created by Biscuit Placebo, You, Me, Hell is a creepy point-and-click adventure game in which 2 playable protagonists, a boy and girl named Tor and Tova, are trapped in their own personal hell. And in their efforts to escape, they not only have to navigate creepy environments, but also their turbulent relationship and character flaws. The art style of this one definitely stands out as creepy, and anytime you have to look at your own personal flaws, always adds a sense of realism that I don't like. I'm flawless. A game from, I believe, in 1997, which is visually designed to be extremely confusing and even nauseating at times. The game uses tricks with 2D assets to create the illusion of a 3D world space, and with seemingly no real purpose at all other than to make you feel confused and dizzy. If you suffer from like motion sickness or anything like that, maybe avoid this just weird game. Another game about a protagonist waking up from cryostasis on a spaceship, of course. Enemy Zero is a 1996 horror game developed for the Sega Saturn with a rather unique twist to it. The creatures that are massacring the crew of this game are actually invisible, and you, the player, must rely on sound to locate them and either kill them or avoid them entirely. The story follows a typical spaceship horror plot with aliens, corporate shadiness, and a crew that is extremely expendable. But I gotta say, for the time that this came out, and having to use only sound to locate them, makes for a rather terrifying environment. This 2022 horror game, developed by David Szymanski, has the player step into the shoes of a convict, trying to earn their freedom by navigating an ocean of blood in a tiny submarine. The goal is to find vital resources after an apocalyptic event known as the Silent Rapture, which caused all plants and stars in the universe to just vanish for some reason. The game basically depicts what most people would consider like a nightmare scenario. Trapped in a small, little submarine, no way to possibly escape, barely any room to move, and you're being hunted by some kind of unknown creature that you can't even see. In all honesty, if I was the convict, I would take my chances in the prison showers or just kill myself. I would never jump into that tiny death trap. And just to add on to the darkness of this game, around that time is when the whole Titanic submarine thing happened, and a lot of people ended up playing this game just because of that. Kind of dark if you think about it. This entry takes a step away from the typical murder, monster, supernatural style of horror that we've been discussing so far, and brings us a much more real type of horror: depression. In Actual Sunlight, you play as Evan Winter, a severely depressed and lonely man who feels as though his life is going nowhere, and begins to believe that the only thing he can do is end it all. This game is bleak in a very, very realistic way, and it's another case of something that happens in the real world all too often, sometimes in front of our very eyes, and we don't even realize it, which is something I really do find scary. This game released in 2014 and was developed by this name, Wazagi. Good luck trying to pronounce that. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were some actual events that happened because of this game. The Classrooms is a rather unique game. Every time you play, it's going to be different, so every playthrough will be unique to you. With proximity voice enabled, you better keep your mouth shut around some of these horrific creatures that you're going to come across. Shot through a VHS camcorder in 1996, you play as Robert Chen, who is exploring the newly condemned local public school to investigate the disappearance of multiple students, one of which is your little sister. However, shortly after entering, you find yourself lost in the seemingly endless and infinite maze of hallways and classrooms, very similar to the Backrooms. And as you explore, you will find tapes that were previously left behind. A game this creepy really only comes around every so often, so if you have not played this one has my seal of approval. It's really awesome, check it out. Another RPG Maker game, this 2015 short story has you playing as Mo, a girl who confesses her love to one of 3 boys, all of which are secretly serial killers. Each boy has multiple endings to their story, which usually 1 or 2 being bad and 1 being good. Mo herself displays strange characteristics and can choose to simply not be bothered by the boys' sick and twisted secrets, which usually results in good endings. It's a short game that is pretty disturbing at times, but its intention is to poke fun at tropes found in horror RPGs. Or it could be poking fun at how women, for some reason, have this obsession with serial killers. I don't know why. Released in 2013 by Foxeye, Sacrifice Girl is a 2D horror game in which a young girl is sacrificed by her village to demon snakes so that they won't destroy the village and eat everybody. After being sacrificed, the young girl, Mio, has to navigate the cursed cave where the demon snakes live, find a way to get out and help her village, and end the threat of the demon snakes for all. But that's if she can return to the surface without drowning or being eaten herself. The Executioner is a text-based RPG made by Lesser Evil Games, in which you play as a hereditary executioner, a role passed down by your father. The game has you committing horrific acts of torture while trying to maintain your sanity. There's also a choice-based storyline involving picking sides in a brewing revolution, choosing whether to support science or magic, and deciding whether or not you have some humanity or if you're far too gone. The game released in 2019 and currently sits with an average rating on the Steam page. So if you've ever wanted to brutally execute people, now's your chance. Based on the works of author Edgar Allan Poe, this 1995 game has the player experiencing virtual retellings of the books, The Cast of Amontillado, The Telltale Heart, and Berenice, from the perspective of both victim and the murderer. There's actually very little gameplay aside from just walking around until a cutscene triggers, but the physical appearance of many of these characters is very distorted and terrifying. which is due to an intentional design choice and experimentation with 3D software. I wouldn't be surprised if these characters gave tons of people nightmares back in the day. I mean, just look at these guys. Horrifying. This game is another white supremacist game created by Two Genders Productions that I really couldn't find too much information about. I mean, come on, let's be honest. Do you really want all this stuff in your search history? It seems to have been a topic of conversation around late 2019, and it centers on a straight religious white man who takes up violence after losing his job due to quote unquote diversity. The game is a third person hack and slash with a post apocalyptic theme, which, as you can probably guess, has the player slaughtering minorities in creepy, desolate environments, one of which is an asylum. It seems like they just wanted to make a really, really racist game happen in creepy places. I don't know why. Angry Goy is another absurdly racist video game about slaughtering different kinds of minorities. I really couldn't find too much about this game. Hell, even trying to find anything on YouTube is next to near impossible because YouTube KO'd almost everything about it. But from what I could find, the game follows the murderous exploits of a neo-Nazi who took out his hates on blacks, Jews, and refugees after hearing that 6 million immigrants have arrived in Europe, and activities would include shooting up resettlement camps and pushing Jews into ovens. And at the end of the game, you are quote-unquote treated to a speech from Adolf Hitler. So yeah, maybe kind of understand why this was taken off of YouTube. And there really isn't much information about who made the game, because it's credited to Wheelmaker Studios, but that's a fake name, so who knows where this popped up at. Blood Rush is a not safe for work game by Blue Mad Diode about an assassin named Clarissa who navigates the deteriorating entertainment district of Kaburocho, which is notorious for homicides, looting, coercion, soliciting, and narcotics, among other quote-unquote immoral activities. Clarissa teams up with a policewoman named Kiriko, who share the objective of dismantling Corrupt Garden, the organization that killed Clarissa's family and caused her right eye to go blind. The game is quote-unquote Rule 34 in nature, but has strong emphasis on violence, gore, and cruelty, which seems to play into the Rule 34 aspect of the game too, so you kind of know what you're getting into at that point. Anti-Japan War Online is an MMORPG that was being developed by China in the early 2000s to instill both Chinese patriotism and hatred towards the Japanese in the youth of China. The game was to have players step into the role of a Chinese soldier in World War II, defending their homeland from the Japanese invaders. As you might know if you know anything about history, the Japanese in World War II engaged in some pretty horrific acts. A lot of it was aimed at China, and if you were to ask me, I think the Japanese in World War II might have been more evil than the Nazis. And the Nazis were pretty freaking evil. With years of horrific human experimentation, torture, mass killings, and more inflicted upon China during these times, and a lot of it starts with the letter R and APE, like just look up the rape of Nanking, it's pretty barbaric. This game seemed to be a product of resentment towards the Japanese for everything that they did during World War II and the numerous war crimes that they committed, and potentially could have been used to promote violence towards the Japanese in modern day. It is kind of interesting though. I really couldn't find anything about this game from like after 2008, or even a way to play it. It's almost as if it's been like completely wiped from the internet. But since you can't play it, you might as well watch a movie kind of about it. If you want to see a really good movie that details this point in history, watch the movie Flowers of War. It has Christian Bale in it, aka Batman, and it's a really good movie that shows you just the barbaricness of the Japanese during World War II and the suffering of the Chinese people. Definitely a great movie, check it out. This game is, well, it's basically a flash game where you have to try and hang conservative South Korean politician Lee Ho-chang. If you couldn't quite tell, this game may or may not fall under political extremism, and that's because it is quite literally North Korean propaganda. This came out sometime around the early 2010s, and it is playable, but I'm not sure I personally would trust a link to a North Korean propaganda website just to play a game where you try to kill a politician. I'm gonna pass on that one. But if you want Senor Trump to come break down your door, then by all means, be my guest. LostBoy.exe was a 2012 walking simulator in the style of the original Doom game, where the player navigated a maze and discovered images, usually biblical in nature, until nothing, because the game and its mysteries was designed to actually be unsolvable. The real interesting thing about this game is that it's infamous on 4chan, because the game was originally posted for users to play, and it wasn't long until after its initial release that someone else came along and posted a heap of links all over the site claiming it was the link to download the game, only for people to learn the hard way that this link was malware, that now all of their personal data had been stolen and reposted for anyone to see. Any thread related to this game was pretty much nuked, including the thread which actually contained the original game. And because of this, LostBoy.exe is considered by many to be lost media, and any existing footage sparks debate on whether it's actually genuine or a recreation. This entry is a Rule 34 game produced by quote-unquote a gathering of human waste. Off to a really good start. And it is specifically catered to sadists, as it has the player torture a girl to death over the course of 30 days. And I guess the description wanted to highlight that scat is apparently a key theme here. Kill me now. I can't believe a studio with human waste in their title made a game about poop. Who would have saw that coming? But anyway, despite the game being available on some freaky-ass porn sites, it has received quite a lot of criticism among users of those sites, as for a majority of people, the whole idea of this game takes things a little too far. But, of course, there's also a small fan base for this game, which is kind of disturbing because you never know who could be out there enjoying this content. You know who you are. I couldn't resist the opportunity to talk about something San Andreas related here, and this entry is rather interesting, as it refers to a lost mod that allowed players to search for missing people. But it becomes very creepy very fast when you learn that each person you look for is someone who was actually missing in real life. The mod was originally only found in Spanish and was considered lost media, until people realized it actually probably isn't even real at all, and was made up because of some YouTube drama and the GTA community. I couldn't find much to validate any stories related to this, but I like to think something creepy like this does exist somewhere deep, deep, deep in the internet. That is going to be the end of this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you want to see another iceberg, click here, or click here. That's all I have for you today. Leave.